She stood alone in the grand ballroom of Dunmore Hall, surrounded by candlelight and laughter, and heard the words that shattered her heart into 1,000 quiet pieces. It was not a direct insult. It was worse. It was truth, spoken carelessly as if she did not exist. Rosalind, Duchess of Dunmore, wife of Nicholas Devereux for 6 long months, had been drifting toward her husband's side through the crowd, hopping for a smile, a glance, anything that might soften the cold distance he had wrapped around her since their wedding night. She wore a gown of pale rose silk, chosen because his sister had once mentioned he liked the color. Her hair was arranged perfectly, her gloved hands trembling only slightly as she approached the cluster of men near the fireplace. Then she heard Lord Ashby's lazy voice. "Your Grace, your Duchess looks rather fetching tonight. Still the honeymoon glow, I presume." Nicholas Devereux, Duke of Dunmore, lifted his glass of brandy. The firelight carved sharp angles across his handsome, remote face. He did not look toward Rosalind. He did not even pause. "The marriage is a matter of convenience," he said, his tone utterly flat. "Nothing more. She knows her place." Lord Ashby chuckled, and the sound scraped across Rosalind's skin like broken glass. She stopped mid-step, invisible behind a marble column, and felt the floor tilt beneath her. She knew her place. Yes, she had been told her place since the day her father's debts had nearly swallowed their family, since the Duke of Dunmore had appeared like a silent savior with an unromantic offer, her hand in exchange for clearing every ledger. She had hoped, foolish girl, that a marriage might grow into something warmer. That the solemn, grieving man who had buried a wife 2 years before might someday look at her with tenderness. Now she understood. She was a transaction, a silent partner in a life he never wanted. She turned away from the column, her face numb, and walked slowly through the glittering crowd. No one stopped her. No one noticed the new Duchess slipping out onto the moonlit terrace, her throat so tight she could barely breathe. She stood in the chill of the April night, watching her own breath form tiny ghosts, and made a decision she would come to regret and cherish in equal measure. She would stop hopping. She would learn to live without his love. The pain that began that night would shape her more than any act of kindness ever could. In the weeks before the ball, Rosalind had been a woman trying desperately to be seen. She had arrived at Dunmore Hall as Lady Rosalind Fairchild, daughter of a baron with more charm than coin, with a heart full of cautious optimism. The great stone estate had seemed a kingdom of shadows. Nicholas had met her at the door, tall and dark-eyed, and his welcome had been polite, brittle, final. Their wedding had been a quiet affair. He had kissed her forehead and retreated to his study. She had told herself that grief was a locked room and patience would find the key. She learned his habits. He liked coffee black, no sugar, taken in the library at dawn. He rode his black stallion, Tempest, across the northern fields and returned with dust on his boots and distance in his eyes. He never spoke of Eleanor, the first Duchess, but the house was full of her ghost. Her portrait in the West Gallery, her embroidery still on a chair in the morning room, her favorite roses blooming under the gardener's devoted care. Rosalind did not resent the dead woman. She pitied the living man who could not let her go. So she tried. She ordered his favorite meals. She sat with him at dinner, filling the silence with gentle questions about his day. He answered with one word, sometimes none. She mended a tear in his riding glove, and he thanked her as though she were a servant. She reached for his hand once, and he pulled away so swiftly that shame burned her cheeks for hours. Still, hope clung to her like a stubborn ivy. That hope died in the ballroom. The morning after she overheard his words, Rosalind rose early and did not go to the library to pour his coffee. She did not linger in the hallway, hopping to catch him before his ride. Instead, she put on a plain gray walking dress and went alone to the estate's neglected east garden. It was a wild place, overgrown with brambles, abandoned after Eleanor's death. She stood among the weeds and felt a strange kinship. Forgotten things, both of them. She began to work there, pulling dead vines, digging her hands into the soil. She asked the head gardener for tools, and he looked shocked that a duchess would dirty her gloves. But she needed to grow something, even if it was only a garden. The labor soothed the ache she could not name. Day after day, she returned. The Duke did not notice her absence from the house. He did not ask where she went. A month passed. The garden began to breathe again. Tiny green shoots emerged, and Rosalind felt the first fragile stirring of something like peace. She still ate dinner with Nicholas, but now she sat in comfortable silence, no longer straining to fill the void. He did not seem to mind. He barely looked up from his plate. Then came the evening of the dinner party. It was a small gathering of local gentry, arranged by Nicholas's widowed aunt, Lady Westbrook, who had come to stay. Lady Westbrook was a sharp-eyed woman who saw everything and said little. At dinner, the conversation turned to estate management, and one of the guests, a portly squire, made a dismissive remark about the Duke's tenants in the East Village, calling them lazy. Rosalind set down her spoon. "The East tenants are not lazy, sir," she said quietly. "The soil there drains poorly. I have been speaking with them. A new drainage ditch would double their yield." Silence fell. Everyone stared at the Duchess, who had dared to correct a man. Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her gaze steady. She had spent the past weeks visiting the tenants, listening to their struggles. She knew more about the land than any of these people realized. The squire blustered, but Nicholas spoke before he could. "My wife is correct," the Duke said, and his voice was calm, but there was something new in it, a flicker of surprise. "I have seen the reports. She has been most diligent." It was the first time he had ever defended her publicly. Rosalind's heart gave a treacherous leap. For one dangerous moment, hope whispered again. But then she remembered the ballroom, and she silenced it. She merely inclined her head and returned to her meal, not meeting her husband's gaze. Lady Westbrook watched them both with unreadable eyes. The next day, Rosalind was in the East Garden, planting lavender along the old stone wall, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up and found a young man standing at the garden's edge, hat in hand, his expression one of polite curiosity. He had sandy hair and a kind face, and he wore the simple but neat clothes of a steward. "Forgive me, your grace," he said, bowing. "I am Nathaniel Reed, the land steward's son. I have been sent to assist with the drainage project you mentioned. My father said you wished to oversee the plans." Rosalind brushed dirt from her hands and smiled, a genuine smile she had almost forgotten how to wear. "I do. Please join me. I have sketches." Nathaniel Reed was everything her husband was not. He was warm, open, and unafraid to show enthusiasm. He walked with her through the fields, explaining soil composition and water flow with genuine passion. He listened to her ideas without condescension. They began to meet regularly, always in the open air, always with the respect due a duchess and a steward's son. There was nothing improper, and yet Rosalind felt a dangerous lightness when she spoke with him, a sense of being seen as a person, not a shadow. Nicholas, meanwhile, remained a distant figure, but small shifts began to ripple through the house. One evening, he appeared in the doorway of the library where she was reading estate ledgers. He stood there for a long moment, as if uncertain why he had come. Rosalind looked up, her expression neutral, and waited. "You have been occupied," he said finally. It was not a question. "There is much to do," she replied, turning a page. She did not elaborate. She did not invite him to sit. He lingered, then left. Rosalind exhaled slowly, her heart beating too fast. She had not run to him. She had not brightened with desperate eagerness. It was a small victory, but it felt like a door closing inside her. And Nicholas Devereux, for the first time, felt the draft. He began to notice her absence in the morning. The library was silent and cold without her quiet presence pouring his coffee. He found himself pausing outside the East Garden, watching her from a window. She was always moving, always working, her dark hair escaping its pins, her cheeks flushed with exertion. She looked different. She looked alive. And he realized with a slow, creeping unease that she had stopped looking at him. The glances she used to send his way, full of tentative hope, had vanished. Now her eyes were calm, courteous, empty. She treated him with the same polite distance she might give a stranger. It should have been a relief. It was not. The first crack in his armor came on a Sunday afternoon in late June. The village held its annual summer fair, and Rosalind had agreed to help with the charity stalls. Nicholas attended out of obligation, moving through the crowd with practiced dignity. He saw his wife before she saw him. She stood near the produce tent, laughing at something Nathaniel Reed was saying. Her head was tilted back, her laughter bright and free, and her hand rested lightly on Nathaniel's sleeve. The steward's son looked at her with unmistakable admiration, his whole body angled toward her like a flower seeking the sun. Something hot and sharp twisted in Nicholas's chest. He had never heard her laugh like that, not once. He had never made her smile that way. He stood frozen, watching as a terrible realization bloomed. She had given him all her early efforts, her soft words, her hopeful eyes, and he had offered only ice. Now someone else was reaping the warmth she had so freely given. He did not approach them. He turned and walked stiffly back to the carriage, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. That night at dinner he broke the silence. "You seem quite familiar with the steward's son," he said, his voice carefully level. Rosalind looked up, startled. She set down her fork with deliberate calm. "He is assisting with the drainage project. He has been most helpful. I trust the assistance is entirely professional." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I do not understand your implication, Your Grace." The title stung. She had called him Nicholas in the early days, shyly, hopefully. Now he was Your Grace again. He had not noticed when she stopped using his name. "I imply nothing," he said, but his tone was brittle. "I merely remind you of your position." Rosalind took a slow breath. "My position," she repeated, and he heard something new in her voice, something hard and quiet. "My position is to be a matter of convenience, nothing more. I believe those were your words, Your Grace. I am simply fulfilling my role." The silence that followed was suffocating. Nicholas stared at her, and for the first time he saw the wound he had inflicted. He saw the scar it had left. He opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? That he had not meant for her to hear, that he had been a fool. The truth was too vast, too tangled with his own guilt and grief, and he did not know how to speak it. Rosalind rose from the table, her composure intact but her eyes bright with unshed tears she refused to let fall. "If you will excuse me, I have letters to write." She left him sitting alone in the candle-lit dining room, the remains of their meal between them, and Nicholas Devereux felt the cold weight of his own making settle around his shoulders. That night he walked the dark hallways of Dunmore Hall, past Aline's portrait, past the closed door of Rosalind's chamber. He had not entered that room since their wedding night, when he had awkwardly informed her that separate chambers would be best. She had nodded, her face pale, and said nothing. He remembered the way her fingers had trembled. He had told himself he was being kind, sparing her from a union she had not chosen, from a man still haunted. But now, standing in the silent corridor, he wondered if he had only been a coward. He went to his study and poured a brandy he did not drink. On his desk lay a small stack of papers, and beneath them, a letter he had found discarded in the library that morning, written in Rosalind's elegant hand. It was addressed to her younger sister, and he had not meant to read it, but his eyes had caught a phrase before he could look away. "I am learning to be content, dearest Lydia. He will never love me, and I have accepted it. There is a strange peace in letting go. Do not pity me. I am building a life of my own making. It will have to be enough." The words had branded themselves into his mind. She had accepted it. She had let go. And the peace she spoke of was not the peace of fulfillment but of surrender. He had done that. He had taken a hopeful, gentle-hearted woman and turned her into someone who expected nothing, because he had given nothing. Nicholas pressed his palms against his eyes. He thought of Aline, his first wife, who had died of consumption 2 years ago, a slow wasting he had refused to see until it was too late. He had buried himself in politics and duty, avoiding her sick room because he could not bear to watch her fade. When she died, he had been consumed by guilt, a guilt so immense it had become a wall around his heart. He had sworn never to love again, never to risk such pain. Marrying Rosalind had been a practical decision, a way to secure the duchy and silence his family's pressure. He had not expected her to be kind. He had not expected her to try so hard to reach him. And when she had, he had pushed her away with all the cruelty of a man terrified of feeling anything at all. Now she had stopped trying, and he was terrified in a different way. The next morning he did something he had never done. He went to the east garden. The sun was just rising, gilding the dew-soaked leaves, and the air smelled of lavender and turned earth. He found Rosalind already there, kneeling by a bed of roses, a basket of cuttings beside her. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her expression was guarded. "Your Grace," she said, rising, "is something wrong?" He stood awkwardly, feeling like an intruder in a sacred place. "The garden, you have transformed it." She wiped her hands on her apron. "It needed care, that is all." Like me, he thought, and the truth of it was a blade. He took a step closer. "Rosalind," he stopped, her name strange on his lips after so many months of silence. "I have been a poor husband." Her eyes flickered with something, surprise or wariness, he could not tell. "There is no need for apologies," she said quietly. "I understand the nature of our arrangement." The calm acceptance in her voice was worse than any anger. He reached out, almost involuntarily, and touched her hand. She did not pull away, but she did not respond. Her fingers were still and cold in his grasp. "I would like to change that arrangement," he said, his voice rough. She studied his face for a long moment, and he saw the battle behind her eyes, the memory of all the times she had hoped and been disappointed. Finally, she withdrew her hand gently. "Change cannot be commanded, Your Grace. It must be grown, like this garden. It takes time, and it cannot be done if the soil is poisoned by past neglect." She turned back to her roses, dismissing him without a word. He stood there, a duke accustomed to authority, and felt utterly powerless. He had no right to demand her trust. He had to earn it, and he did not know how. The days that followed were a study in slow, painful growth. Nicholas began to seek Rosalind out, not with grand gestures but with small, deliberate steps. He appeared in the garden with a tray of lemonade on a hot afternoon. She accepted it with a quiet thank you and continued her work. He asked her opinion on estate matters, and she answered with intelligent, measured advice that made him realize how much she had learned in her solitude. He found himself watching her, noticing details he had ignored before. The way she hummed softly when she concentrated, the kindness she showed the servants, the strength in her slender shoulders that had carried a burden no one should bear alone. And all the while, Nathaniel Reed remained a quiet presence, always respectful, always nearby. Nicholas saw them together often, walking the fields, discussing crop rotations. He hated the jealousy that coiled in his gut, but he could not suppress it. One evening he saw Nathaniel hand Rosalind a small, leather-bound book. She opened it and smiled, and the smile was so bright it hurt to watch. Nicholas turned away and went to his study, where he sat in the dark and wrestled with demons of his own making. The turning point came with a discovery Rosalind made entirely by accident. She was cleaning out the old music room, a task she had undertaken to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering to dangerous hopes. The room had been a leaner's sanctuary, filled with her harp and her sheet music and the lingering scent of dried roses. In a small, dust-covered chest beneath the window seat, Rosalind found a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. She opened it, and the first line made her heart clench. Eleanor's handwriting was delicate but firm. The entry spoke of her illness, her slow decline, and her husband, not with bitterness but with a sorrowful tenderness that brought tears to Rosalind's eyes. "He is so afraid. He will not come to me because he cannot bear to see me suffer. I have tried to tell him it is his presence I need, not his protection, but he hides behind his duties. Poor Nicholas. He will blame himself when I am gone, and I cannot stop him. I can only leave him this. It was never his fault. I was already fatting when we married. He gave me 6 years of quiet devotion, and that is enough. I want him to live again. I want him to find someone who will break through his walls. I have prayed for that woman, whoever she may be." Folded in the back of the journal was a sealed letter, addressed to Nicholas in Eleanor's hand. Rosalind sat on the dusty floor, the journal in her lap, and wept. She wept for the dead woman who had loved her husband so selflessly. She wept for Nicholas, trapped in a prison of guilt he had built with his own hands. And she wept for herself, because she now understood that the wall between them had never been about her worth. It had been about his brokenness. She carried the journal and the letter to Nicholas's study that very evening. He was sitting at his desk, staring at nothing, and when she entered, he looked up with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I found something," she said, her voice unsteady. She laid the journal on the desk, open to the final entry. It belonged to Eleanor. Nicholas went pale. He reached for the journal as if it were a ghost made tangible. He read in silence, his hands beginning to shake. When he reached the end, a sound escaped him, a raw, anguished noise that was not quite a sob. He pressed the letter to his forehead and his shoulders heaved. Rosalind did not go to him. She stood by the window, giving him space, her own heart aching. She heard him break the seal, heard the rustle of paper, heard the long, shuddering breath he took. Eleanor's last words to him were simple: "Forgive yourself. You are always enough. Love again, my dearest. Do not let my death be the end of your heart. I will be watching, and I will be so glad when you finally let the light in." When Nicholas looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, his composure shattered. He looked at Rosalind, and in that gaze was all the pain and regret of 2 long years. He stood slowly and crossed the room until he stood before her, a broken man with no defenses left. "I loved her," he said hoarsely, "and I could not save her. I thought if I never loved again, I would never have to feel that loss. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you at a distance, but I was only protecting myself, and I have hurt you beyond measure." Rosalind's throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered, "you did." He flinched but did not look away. "I know I have no right to ask, but that day in the garden you said that change must be grown. I want to grow it. I want to learn to be the husband you deserved from the beginning. I am not asking you to trust me now. I am asking only for a chance to try." She studied him, this man she had once loved from a distance, a love that had withered in the cold. She could still feel the embers of it, buried deep beneath the ashes of disappointment. But she was no longer the naive girl who had arrived at Dunmore Hall. She was a woman who had learned to stand alone. She would not throw herself into his arms simply because he had finally shed his armor. "I will give you a chance," she said, her voice steady. "But I will not wait forever. I have learned to live without you, Nicholas. If you want my heart, you must earn it day by day. I will not chase you. I will not beg. You must come to me." He nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I will." And so began the slow, fragile healing. Nicholas kept his word. He did not press her, did not demand. He began to join her in the garden, not to speak, but simply to be near her. He learned the names of the flowers she planted. He accompanied her on tenant visits and listened as she spoke with the farmers, her knowledge and compassion evident. He told her about Eleanor, the joyful memories, the painful ones, and she listened without judgment. He told her about his fear, his guilt, and she held space for his grief without letting it consume her own newfound strength. Rosalind felt the embers stir. She watched him struggle, saw the effort it cost him to break his habits of silence, and her heart began to soften, though she guarded it carefully. She still met Nathaniel Reed, but now she noticed Nicholas's quiet acceptance, his refusal to demand she end the friendship. One afternoon she found him in the library, reading a book on botany he had borrowed from her shelf. He looked up sheepishly. "I wanted to understand what you love," he said. That small, awkward confession did more to mend the rift between them than any grand speech. One evening in late autumn, as the first frost painted the windows, they walked together through the east garden, now dormant but rich with the promise of spring. The sky was a deep violet, and the air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Rosalind paused by the stone wall where the lavender had flourished all summer. I planted this garden because I needed to grow something beautiful in a life that felt barren, she said quietly. I never imagined you would help me tend it. Nicholas stood close to her, his hands in his coat pockets, his profile sharp against the twilight. I should have been here from the start, he said. I should have seen you. I see you now, Rosalind. I see your strength, your kindness, your stubborn hope that refused to die even when I starved it. I see the woman who rebuilt a garden and a duchy, and I think, a broken man. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. You see me, she echoed, and the words were a question and an answer both. He reached out and took her hand, and this time she did not pull away. This time her fingers curled around his, warm and willing. I love you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I think I have loved you for longer than I allowed myself to know. I was too afraid to feel it. I am not afraid now. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of a long winter finally breaking into thaw. I loved you in silence for so long, she whispered. I thought that love had died, but it was only sleeping. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it stole her breath. Then let us wake it together, he said. She stepped into his embrace, and he held her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. The walls he had built crumbled, and in their place grew something new, something fragile but fiercely alive. In the months that followed, Dunmore Hall transformed. Not just the gardens, which bloomed again in spring, but the very air of the house. Laughter returned to its halls. Nicholas and Rosalind were seen walking arm in arm through the village, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. He still had moments of silence, shadows of old grief, but she did not fear them anymore. She understood them, and she knew how to wait, how to reach through the dark and pull him back into the light. 1 year after that first confession, on a morning full of birdsong and new roses, Rosalind stood in the east garden and watched her husband approach with a basket of seedlings. He knelt beside her in the dirt, his fine coat sacrificed to the soil, and helped her press the tender roots into the earth. I spoke to Alina today, he said casually, and she looked at him in surprise. He touched the small locket he now wore, containing a miniature of his first wife. I told her about you, about us. I think she would have liked you very much. Rosalind's heart swelled. I think I would have liked her too. She left you a gift, you know, the permission to live again. He nodded, his eyes bright. And you gave me the courage to accept it. They worked in companionable silence, the sun warm on their backs, and Rosalind thought of the journey that had brought them here. The pain, the distance, the jealousy and regret, the fear of losing what they had almost never had. They had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed but whole. She had stopped chasing love, and in doing so she had found a love that chased her back, a love that was patient and real and hard-won. She looked at the man beside her, the man who had once been a stranger, then an adversary, then a partner, and she smiled. The garden grew, so did they. And in Dunmore Hall, where once only silence had reigned, there was finally, beautifully, a home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next amazing story.